And welcome to this meeting of the Standards and General Purposes Committee. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
None, Chair. Just possible apologies for lateness from Councillor Curtin.
Okay. Item 2 is declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations to be made?
No.
Thank you. Item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Are they agreed? Good. You're doing very well. Item 4 is the final accounts. Suresh, are you going to kick off with this?
Happy to chair, unless you wanted officers to introduce their covering paper.
Sorry, Chair, would you like me to introduce the report very briefly? It's Roger.
Yes, please.
Certainly. Well, thank you, Chair. Well, the committee's asked to essentially approve the auditor's statement of accounts for the council and the group accounts, and indeed the pension fund accounts, and to note any comments from the pensions advisory panel, and also to note EY's comments, and Suresh will come in and talk to his EY's report in short time. Essentially, and very briefly, Chair, because I take the reports as read, the council finished the year with a favourable variance of some 1.7 million, not materially impacted at that time by COVID, but clearly we'd received some grants in advance to help ease the burden for the council and the local area, which we carried forward in the new year. But clearly, because of COVID, one of the auditor's recommendations is that we prepare a going concern statement, which we've done. Indeed, the accounts are prepared on a going concern basis, and there's a statement in the accounts at note 42 to that effect. We've met the publication deadlines for the draft set of accounts, and we're hoping to meet the final deadline for the final set of accounts with the audit opinion, but that is subject to confirmation from EY. In deference to the impact of COVID has made, the temporary regulations were put in that delayed the timetable, the audit timetable, indeed the preparation timetable for the accounts, which we have met, and you have them before you tonight. There are a few areas of discussion over treatment, which I'll let Suresh cover, Chair, and we can comment on those if necessary. We followed the accounting guidance, and particularly with regards to the dedicated schools grant deficit position. The report highlights also those areas of audit adjustments that we've made on recommendation from our audit colleagues. I think at that stage, Chair, I will pass over to Suresh, who will introduce the auditor's report, which is the important part of tonight's proceedings.
Okay, Suresh, over to you.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Roger. Actually, I should commend officers on their paper accompanying audit results report. I thought it was very comprehensive and clear, and actually kind of steal some of our thunder in respect of what we wanted to say. But we'll focus on
something off your bill.
You're always asking, Chair. I'll keep it under
One
consideration.
day.
So our report starts on your page 227 in the pack, and you'll notice on the covering letter that the date of this report was 10th of September, almost 2 weeks ago. And we'll focus on what's changed since then, because there's quite a bit that's changed that will put us in a relatively good position in terms of progress. But I mean, essentially, there are some procedures that we still need to complete. And I'm going to ask my colleagues, Simon Luck and Simon Mathers, to talk you through those in a second. But ultimately, we anticipate issuing an unqualified audit opinion and have no matters to report on your value for money conclusion. Clearly, that's subject to concluding those outstanding procedures, but that is my expectation. If I take you to the executive summary, and in particular, page 233 of your pack, which is page 7 of our report, you'll see there we've got a status of the audit listing various procedures that we at the 10th of September we still had to complete. Simon Luck's just going to quickly update you on those outstanding procedures, Chair.
Go ahead, Simon.
So in the table of outstandings, we've completed.
Sorry, I'm struggling to hear you. Can you
Sorry.
turn your mic up?
Yeah. Can you hear me better now?
I can. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So in the table of outstanding, we've completed more than half of the work stated there. So in terms of going concern, charge revenue, lease, MRP, operating lease, and on-street parking and trading operations are now complete, and IAS 19 assurance from pension fund auditor, payroll expenditure, final review of audit work, post-balance sheet events review, unrecorded liabilities, management representations, audit report consultation, and final review of the final version of statements is still outstanding.
So we anticipate, Chair, to be able to complete all that work in the next probably 3 to 4 weeks, but in advance of the 5th of November committee meeting, where we will issue our final audit results report and seek signed statements at that stage. On that page 233, one thing just to clarify and update now, we were anticipating that we might be issuing an emphasis of matter in relation to property, plant and equipment valuation. We have now decided that whilst there is a material uncertainty reported in your valuations, the extent of that material uncertainty is not that significant in terms of your overall property, plant and equipment asset base. So we don't think that needs to be an emphasis of matter. The going concern emphasis of matter stays. And
sorry, can you just repeat that? The last few words I couldn't hear. You don't think it's a
emphasis of matter, Chair. So as the report is currently drafted, we said we would include 2 items of emphasis of matter in our audit report. One around going concern, which stands, and as Roger referred to, you've got a revised disclosure in your accounts, which we will be drawing attention to in our audit report. The other one was around property, plant and equipment valuation, where because of COVID, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors asked valuers to, in effect, put a caveat against some of the valuations, but we don't think that's significant enough at Merton to warrant an emphasis of matter. So that won't be included in the audit report, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Also on that page, we talk about audit differences, and there are a couple of things I think we just wanted to highlight, which Simon Mathers is going to explain.
Thanks, Suresh. So we report further on in the report on the main section on audit differences to adjusted differences. I don't propose to go through either of those in detail. One was in relation to property valuation. The other one, which is formed of 2 areas, were just accounting errors, neither of which impact the general fund. We also report one further unadjusted misstatement. This is in relation to the valuation of property, plant and equipment, and we're saying that on a judgmental basis, we believe the carrying value of property, plant and equipment in the financial statements is understated by approximately 6.3 million. We, as in previous years, have involved our own valuation professionals to review the council's approach to valuation of property, plant and equipment, paying particular emphasis this year to the issue that Suresh has just highlighted around the material uncertainty caveat. So for assets carried at what's called an existing use valuation, there was a disagreement on 2 assets in the sample, which were both industrial properties, between our professional valuers and the council's professional valuers. The disagreement related to adjustments made in relation to Crossrail and covenant strength to the valuation. The value of the disagreement was 6.3 million. We follow the approach of our valuers, and any difference from their professional opinion we treat as a judgmental misstatement. The council believes this is just reasonably a difference in professional opinion between 2 valuers, so has not adjusted for that. Disclosures in the financial statements at note 43 have been updated to reflect the council's point of view, and we will ask ultimately for management representations in relation to this. The amount involved isn't material to our responsibilities. All other audit differences have been adjusted for. Therefore, this doesn't have any impact on the opinion.
Just 3 more things, Chair, we wanted to highlight then. If you go over to the next page on your 234, Roger mentioned the accounting treatment around dedicated schools grant, DSG, and he's correct that the way the accounts are now drafted reflect the accounting treatment that the CIPFA code recommends. There's been a light development on DSG positions, and you'll probably be aware, Chair, there's a wider discussion going on around with councils who have got significant DSG deficits and the Department of Education. One of the potential actions that are going to be taken for this year's accounts, for these accounts that we're auditing, is that CIPFA may introduce what's called a statutory override. So that in effect will take your DSG deficit out of your reserves and into it's into a unusable reserve. So in effect takes it off your kind of books in effect. So we're expecting that potentially to come out in the next 2 or 3 weeks, which will then require you to adjust your accounts accordingly. It is only a minor adjustment in the grand scheme of things, but it is for the purposes of the DSG deficit, it's quite an important accounting change. So that's one thing that we will have to wait until that gets resolved in the next, well, hopefully 2 to 3 weeks. 2 more things. One was the value for money, which I'm going to get Simon to quickly update you on, and then I'll finally update you on fees.
So if we talk about value for money now, and if I could refer you to page 252 of your papers, where we set out the risk that we've audited value for money conclusion against. So if you look specifically at page 255 of your papers, we set out our approach. So I suppose to start with, to inform you that we have now completed our work in this area, and we are likely to issue an unqualified value for money conclusion at the council. Our approach followed the various areas set out on page 255. So we looked at the authority's plans and arrangements to address budget pressures last year in children's schools and families, to achieve its saving targets and address budget gaps such that it can deliver sustainable resource deployment. And we followed up on the issues highlighted as part of last year's value for money conclusion work. So if we look back at the 1920 year, as Roger said when he introduced the accounts item, the council was successful in delivering a small 1.7 million surplus on the general fund, and within that delivered a surplus in children's schools and families. There are still pressure points within that budget, though, particularly around special education needs and SEN transport costs. So those are areas that have impacted the council previously and continue to impact the council. In terms of savings targets and addressing budget gaps, we've looked at the last update of the medium-term financial strategy that was undertaken in February of this calendar year, and we're satisfied that it was updated reasonably. There was a reasonable basis for the projections, that the budget gaps reported are accurate, and that savings plans are in place to or are being worked up to address those budget gaps going forward. So we have no matters to report there. Clearly, subsequent to that, the impact of C19 on the council, and indeed every other council, has been significant, and the MTFS in due course will need to be updated to reflect that. We know that officers are working on that now through our work on going concern. And we will reference that in the value for money conclusion we give. The NAO has made clear, though, that the impact of C19 should not really impact on our 1920 value for money judgment. The final thing that we did in our value for money work is to look at the financial pressures created in the area of special education needs, and the SEND inspection result that the council received in September last year in its response to it. So there are significant pressures within SEND, and they are driving to a large extent the DSG overspend and the DSG cumulative deficit that the council faces. We are, however, satisfied that the council has reasonable arrangements working with the CCG to develop an action plan to address the matters that have been raised as part of the SEND inspection. As we've made clear in our audit plan update, we don't consider the DSG deficit as an issue relating to the council's own financial resilience, because it's been made clear it shouldn't be funded from the general fund. But We are broadly satisfied that the council is doing all that it can through its recovery plan arrangements to ensure that it can control the deficit to the extent that is possible. So we've not reported this yet. But we are very likely to give an unqualified value for money conclusion, and we thought it would be helpful to give you a flavour of the reporting.
And then just finally, Chair, I'm sure you'd say I've been amiss if I don't mention the fees. So that's on page 262, but you'll see there that we need to conclude on those final fees in those areas where we've carried out additional work, which link into actually a number of the things that we've actually given you a verbal update on. And we'll obviously come back with the actual final fees on those in due course. We'll stop there, Chair, and take any questions.
Okay, do members have any questions? Roger, do you want to just add anything or respond to anything that's been raised before I take questions?
No, Chair, happy to take questions.
Okay, David Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I would have been asking a question about the valuation, but I think we've had a very comprehensive explanation about the 6.3 million. So it's just coming back to the reserves position. I don't think it's my maths, but the earmarked reserves, the increase in earmarked reserves is actually 11.5 million. And we're told about the 1.716 million underspend plus the additional grants, including nearly 5 million for COVID of 8.76. But those two don't add up to 11.5. So I just wondered if Roger could explain where that sort of 1.5 million comes from.
Roger?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, could I ask what page you're looking at? Is it in the actual accounts or is it in the report?
No, it's in the report, page 11.
Sorry, I was looking at the wrong page. Just bear with me a minute, please.
That's right. The increase in earmark reserves there, table 3, is from 48.1 to 58.6, but the underspend of 1.7 and the grants of 8.7 that carried over actually only come to about 10.4 or 10.5. So there's some extra in there, and I'm not quite sure where it comes from.
Chair, would you mind if I look into that and come back to you? I mean, it might occur to me as we're answering other questions and all that, but if you forgive me,
Roger,
unless Steve knows. Steve?
I did ask a colleague. It's the topping up of.
Steve, I can't hear you. Can you speak up, please? Or turn your volume up?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's better.
It's some late social care grant we received, and we used it to top up the money for COVID-19 in the COVID-19 reserve. The figure's 1.025 million.
Right. Okay, that stacks up. So, actually, we've had now then nearly 6 million in 1920 from the government for COVID emergency funding. Is that right?
Yes.
Are you answering this, Roger?
Yes, I am, Chair. That would be correct. We had 6 million social care and COVID emergency funding and we transferred it to the COVID-19 reserve. That's correct.
Right. So how much is in the COVID-19 reserve then? Because we don't get a breakdown here.
I'll have to look up that one. Unless Steve, you're
Do you know the answer, Steve?
Yes, I do. Hang on.
I'll tell you what, we've got a very good.
It's 6.1. It's excuse me. It's 6.173 million pounds. It's on page 76.
Okay, thank you.
Page 76.
Okay.
Sort of middle of the table.
Yeah, no, I hadn't actually seen that table, and I apologise, but it's quite a thick pack. because we very rarely get to see the earmark reserves except at budget time. There's no interim report that's available to members.
And not only is it a thick pack, but it's a small font size and a faint looking number.
Okay.
But you've managed to get the answer, David, so well done.
I have, and I was right that there was something else there. So I can feel happy now.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve.
Well, if you're happy, we're happy. Ben, you indicated you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, it might be cheekily 2 questions. Yeah, thank you for the report, Roger and Suresh and team and everything. Really appreciate your work on this. Can I just ask a question? So just to clarify there, the effects of COVID-19 was summarised in the report from the council here, but isn't a thing that the external auditors are considering for this year. But if I could ask, as you are complimenting the council's report, would you say that what the council are reporting is, I haven't got the page in front of me, but the cost of COVID versus the amount of the government has provided to the council, there's a big gap there. And I know here you say that in our long-term financial planning that you're broadly on board, and this is to EY, you're broadly on board with our way of projecting gaps in our future funding. Would you say the same about our summaries of the deficit we see and how much COVID is going to cost us and how much support we've got from the government? And then a second question there is just a little bit more explanation about, maybe from Roger, on the potential changing of a code in the reserves for the DSG deficit, how this will maybe even help or hinder our efforts in getting that deficit addressed from the government, as a deficit is implying that we are not getting enough money. And if we, my concern is if we hide it in reserves, then that conversation gets even more complicated. Sorry, 2 kind of large questions there. Thank you.
Okay, Chair, I think there might have been a couple of questions in the first question, so I might get Simon to come in a second as well on the second part of that. So I think the first part of that was around, did we look at the impact of COVID-19 on the council for 1920? I think the reference that Simon made in the verbal update was around the value for money conclusion, where the National Audit Office clarified to all auditors that the impact of COVID-19 on a council's operations wasn't something that would impact the value for money conclusion for 1920. Having said that, it will do for 2021. So you will see that come through as a risk in 2021. What we did do, though, was look at it in respect of the going concern assessment that you've seen now disclosed in note 42, which flows into then the second part of your question, I think, which is around the MTFS and the gaps. And Simon, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, just to say, I'd agree with all of that to start with, Suresh. So for the MTFS, the version of the MTFS that we've looked at was the last update of it, which took place in February of this year, of 2020. So prior to the impact of COVID-19, and at that stage, we were saying that the future projections and the gaps and then the savings programs that underpin them were reasonable and based on reasonable assumptions. It needs to be updated again for the impact of C19. The council is aware of the impact and has made estimates that are repeated in the going concern disclosure that Suresh has talked about, but there does need to be a process that's gone through to formally update the MTFS in due course. So we were saying it was accurate to that point in time. And we're also saying that, I suppose, in terms of the financial statements, the income and expenditure related to C19 at the end of 1920, so at the end of the 31st of March of this calendar year, was reasonably reported. But again, that's largely just the grant funding that had been received that hadn't yet been utilised. If we think about the physical restrictions on movement, they only started from the 23rd of March. So in terms of the financial impacts in the year of account, then they're not that great. They're in 2021. They're in this current year.
And Chair, to answer Councillor Butler's question around the accounting arrangements. Obviously, what we did was we followed the correct accounting guidance, which is issued previously by CIPFA, excuse me, with regard to how we treated the DSG deficit, in that we're not putting it onto the general fund, and we held it as a negative balance. This statutory override will reinforce that and ensure that we don't, in accounting terms, show any provision for DSG from our general fund. But of course, that's only one part of the equation, if you like. The other part of the equation is how do we deal with, as a council, how do schools deal with the DSG deficit? And that's the bit we're still waiting for some guidance on from central government. So as far as the accounting is concerned, we're very clear. It's not to fall on the general fund. But of course, in reality, that still leaves us with some significant deficit on the DSG for schools to pick up. And I think we are working with schools on a recovery plan, and with the DFE on a recovery plan for schools to meet that particular deficit going forward. But it just reflects the pressures that they are facing, which we've discussed earlier on in the meeting. So it only helps part of it. It helps the accounting bit, but doesn't help necessarily the funding of it.
Right. Are you happy with those responses, Ben?
With the responses, maybe not the situation, Chair. Thank you.
Adam.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask the work around going concern from the council's perspective? We spoke about the going concern around the pension fund at the committee a fortnight ago, but obviously with the council's a bit of a different assessment, and just why there is an emphasis of matter paragraph within the audit opinion, and is that common across other councils?
So I don't know if the first part of that question was for officers, Chair, in respect of, from the council's perspective, in terms of the assessment. But in terms of the second part, why it's an emphasis of matter, we consider that disclosure to be important to the reader of the account, to inform their view of the council. If you think about it, it's probably the first time the council's made that kind of disclosure in its accounts, and clearly, given the impact of COVID, we think it's important they did that appropriately, hence the reason why we are emphasising that in our audit report. It will be pretty common across so London boroughs and the larger authorities around the country. Potentially there are some smaller councils who are significantly reliant upon things like investment income and retail property rental streams that are impacted by COVID, that there well may be emphasis of matter there. But by and large, the larger local authorities, London boroughs, there will be an emphasis of matter paragraph in their accounts.
But to obviously confirm, so it isn't a clean going concern opinion. There is some sort of qualification or uncertainty?
No, not at all. I think we try to make that clear in the report, Chair, that an emphasis of matter isn't a qualification or a modification to the audit report. It is, as it says, emphasising a matter to the reader of the account. It is not a qualification. And if that's not clear, Chair, then I'm making it clear now.
Chair, just to answer the first point, encouraged by our auditors, we felt it was a useful exercise to undertake a going concern statement, given the materiality of the impact that COVID's had. And members will be able to read that at page 42, note 42, which the auditors have gone through and seen a lot of the backing documentation that goes behind it. So it may look like a fairly straightforward statement, but there was quite a lot of work involved in preparing it and evidencing to our auditors our preparedness for COVID and the impact that that's going to have on the council's finances.
And Suresh, what are the requirements here? Our officers pull the evidence together and then you scrutinise that and say whether you think that is consistent with the practices that you should find within a local authority. Is that right?
Specifically in relation to going concern, Chair, you prepare every year. You prepare your accounts on the basis of going concern, that they are a going concern. That's no different to any other year. Clearly, this year has been different because of the impact of COVID-19 on that assessment. Hence the reason why we asked the council to carry out a detailed assessment and an assessment that was supported by reasonable assumptions. So we weren't after anything scientific in terms of why you're assuming you're going to receive 10% less in such and such income. It was, is it reasonable? And we challenged that, and we're able to satisfy ourselves that it was a reasonable assessment, and the disclosure then was consistent with that assessment.
Our focus is very much on that, making sure that the council can demonstrate it can remain liquid so it's got sufficient cash to operate for a period of 12 months after we give the audit report. So for a period of 12 months after the start of the November in all probability. And a lot of the work there was around the council producing a cash flow forecast to demonstrate that, and us effectively trying to audit that cash flow forecast.
And is there any extra reporting requirement for that we have to sort of provide the government with? Presumably they're keeping an eye on the finances of all local authorities and need to know, where the pressure points are.
Chair, I can answer that. We prepare a monthly return to MHCLG based on the impact that COVID's had in terms of extra expenditure we're needing to incur, losses of income, and indeed savings that were previously built into the medium-term financial strategy to the extent that they are now deliverable or not deliverable. So we do that every month, and we update Government Office on that.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Are there any other questions from members? Okay, well, in that case, can we approve the 6 recommendations on page 7? Are they agreed? Sorry, Adam, were you voting to agree them, or were you wanting to?
No. It was basically just, a final question just to find out when the audit is actually going to be finalised so we can sign the actual accounts.
I think Suresh said earlier that it would be at the next meeting that I would be asked to sign in blood.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies.
Yeah, no, not a problem. Okay, so can I come back to my question? Can we agree the recommendations on page 7? Okay, they're agreed. Thank you.
Yeah.
So item 5 is...
Chairman, can we just thank the officers and I suppose the accountants as well, even though they're very well paid. But the officers, to get these accounts closed off, has been an enormous struggle in the situation that we find ourselves in with COVID. And we would normally, I think, if we were sat around the table and we could catch one another's eye a bit more easily, we would have said that. And I just wanted
I think, David, that was very remiss of me not to, and I thank you for raising that point. I also welcome you as a member of my tag team to try and beat the auditors' prices down, because we all need to keep on top of that one. And I think we work well as a team, David. So can we agree to thank the staff for their hard work in getting this process completed, despite the difficulties? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, and can we thank the auditors, but recognise that they are sort of receiving substantial fees from us for undertaking this work? That agreed? Thank you. Okay, so moving on, the internal audit progress report. Margaret, I can't see Margaret. I'm on my screen. Oh, there you are. You've popped up. Welcome.
Thank you.
But you've
Thank
probably
you,
been here
Chair.
all the time. We just couldn't see you. Okay,
Probably for the
please
best.
go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
We've lost you now. Oh no, you just moved. God, this is confusing. You were in one box and then suddenly you jumped into another.
Clever trick.
Playing games.
Chair, this is the internal audit progress report. The page, the things I want to just highlight is on page 318, just on the progress of the plan. So at the beginning of September, we were slightly below the number of days we would normally be at that time, but we do expect to catch those days up. We've done 10 assurance opinions, which I've detailed in the appendix, as well as signing off some grant returns and advisory work. So from the 10 assurance opinions, we've got 5 limited, but 4 of those are still at draft. So the one final limited assurance report is on building control, which I've detailed on page 319. All the actions from that have been accepted and are due to be implemented by April 21, and we will be updating on progress on those actions. The report outlines all the P1 actions, which are priority 1 actions, on page 320. So we've got 8 that we're still following up on, and I've given details of those in the appendix 2. So the oldest of those are the declaration of interest for officers. So the update is it has now been agreed, and they intend to put it up on the intranet in October and get these completed by November. So hopefully we can close that action off at the next committee. I can update you on that. The other ones, we've all had dates moved, but they're all in progress to be done. Some of them by October. So again, I can give you an update on those. If anyone's got any questions on the report.
Thank you, Margaret. So with the declarations of interest, when you say you're going to put things on the intranet, is that in an attempt to name and shame, or?
No, it's new guidance and a form that's been done. So it'll be to promote that to officers, to tell them they need to complete that.
Okay, and have we suggested that if they don't, we won't pay them next month? I think that might work. That may be unlawful though, unfair deduction from wages. So let's put that to one side. So are there any questions for Margaret?
Yes, Chair, I have a question here on limited assurances. I noticed that that's on page 318, paragraph 4.3. And limited assurance says it's 50%. Now, my question is, why if limited assurance means there are significant weaknesses in key areas, and these areas are audited every year? Why is there such a high percentage of limited assurance of weaknesses in these areas when they were previously audited?
Well, we don't audit the same areas every year. We try and cover a range of audits across the council. Some audits may be done annually, but most audits would be done over a 3 to 5 year period. The limited assurance reports, there's a few issues that we've highlighted, but because they're still at draft, most of those are still at draft, they're still in discussion with the department. So the prepaid cards and direct payments cover community and housing and children's schools and family. And one of the things they've asked us is actually to split those reports off into 2 reports, which is something we're working on now, and then we can narrow down which department the issues are in. So we have had meetings and we're trying to get those finalised. So yeah, I mean, I suppose it's just the audit plan will sometimes focus, well, it will focus on higher risk areas. So I mean, there's a potential there to have more limited assurance reports as well, which could be another issue.
Yeah, I would have thought that because there are weaknesses in these areas, you'd be auditing them regularly rather than,
Well,
over long periods.
what we do is we actually follow up on all the actions. So on each of these, they'll have recommendations. And although I report up on the priority ones to committee, we follow up on all actions, and we get we check that they've actually implemented what they say they're going to do. So that means it would save us going back to do another audit, but we are always making sure that we close off actions. If we're not happy with the progress, we would put it back on the plan and re-audit. But so that's where we get assurance that these things are in place. So in some ways, although these could be concerned that we've raised these are ones we know about, which is good. But it's the areas we haven't audited that we don't know about that maybe, that these are progressing some change because we're having discussion and we're making them think about the risks. So that's a good thing that they're taking on board
Margaret.
these. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on dealing with some grants, and I'm aware that as part of the response to COVID-19, we've been responsible for distributing grants to the retail, hospitality and leisure scheme. Is that that's new, but there are substantial sums involved. Are you undertaking checks of that area, even though it wasn't kind of planned?
Yes.
But it does represent a substantial sum of public money.
We on the grants, on the business grants and the discretionary grants, we did fraud checks on those. So the checks were done by the revenues team and then passed to us, or the ones that passed the check, and then we put them through CIFAS to make sure that the frauds, any potential fraud areas would be identified for further checking. So that was one area we looked at. We're also doing an audit on COVID-19 response, where we're looking at all the areas that, of grant and the requirements from government and whether the council's met those. So it's not just the grants, we're looking at the procurement changes to rules, Care Act easements, if there is any, hospital discharges. We're looking through all areas to say what have the government set out and how's the council responded. So that report's due. We're hoping to get that actually as a pre-draft this Friday. So that's taken a lot of work, and we're doing that across the partnership councils and doing some comparison as well on approaches to see if there's anything that needs to be considered that could be done when they're looking at the lessons learned, or where there's things as we go forward that we need to be tightening up on. So there's a lot of work on that. We're also doing a review of the COVID-19 infection control, so the money that went out to care homes. We're doing an audit of that at the moment to look at some of the how the money's been spent and whether we can be satisfied that it's been spent properly. And we're also looking at the Rough Sleepers grant, the money that's gone out, and we're getting assurance on the emergency placements. Are we satisfied that the money's been appropriately spent? So this can all support the directors, any sign off they have to do. Certainly on the infection control, they have to sign off by the 30th of September. They've got to do a return to government, so that will help to support their assurance. We can give some assurance as well that we've done some sample checking on those.
Okay, and in order to undertake this work, have you had to drop some other work that was scheduled to take place?
Yes, definitely. It's definitely going to be a flexible audit plan this year. We've having to, if there's things that are coming up that we're aware of, we need assurance. So, but I think that's the right thing to do. We have to focus on the key risks for the council. So some of the audits we had planned to do will shift into another year. I mean, there may be areas anyway, it's quite difficult to audit at the moment remotely. Okay. Like schools are very difficult. Obviously, they're not going to want us coming in. So we're going to be looking at perhaps getting some different way of assurance, but we won't be spending the same amount of time we would have, but we will be spending it on COVID work this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do members have any further questions for the head of internal audit? No? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for that, Margaret. Are we just noting this report? Trying to find the beginning of it. To consider and comment. Okay, I think we have.
Thank you.
And we have. So thank you very much for that. And please pass on our thanks, picking up David's points, to all your staff for their hard work. It is
Thank you.
appreciated. Okay, so item 6 is the Ombudsman's report on housing, and Steve is there. He's just popped up on my screen. So would you like to take us through this, Steve, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody. Good evening. It's a whistle-stop tour of the paper, I'm afraid, but generally speaking, this report sets out the history of a homeless application that was made to the council by Mr. X and his family, which sadly led to a finding of maladministration by the local government ombudsman. In summary, the council had accepted a housing duty to this man and his children, and it owed him a duty to provide him with accommodation. After careful consideration of all the relevant facts, we placed him into accommodation in the West Midlands. As part of that process, we have a local placement policy. Given the chronic shortage of accommodation, both temporary and permanent, we have to take some important decisions and difficult decisions about who would get priority for in-borough placements, accommodation 90 minutes away, and accommodation anywhere in the UK. And that placement policy flowed from a very important case in Westminster City Council. The council took the view that this man and his family could move anywhere within the UK and placed him in the West Midlands. Mainly, we took the view that he was unemployed, he had minor children who weren't in school, his wife wasn't working, there were no special exceptional circumstances to consider. The chap then engaged the services of shelter, and in accordance with the law, he appealed the decision of the suitability of the accommodation in the West Midlands on the basis of its location. He did not succeed in that appeal. The council upheld its original decision. There would have followed a further appeal, but this time to the county court on points of law. The chap did not appeal to the courts on points of law. However, what he did do, he made a complaint to the LGO that we'd failed to take regard of his self-employed status. We took the view that he wasn't self-employed and he wasn't working, but nonetheless, the LGO decided that the facts pointed to the fact that he was actually a self-employed chap. We decided to accept the LGO's finding, as is the LGO's prerogative to make such decisions. As a consequence of the LGO's findings, we have in fact done the following. We've written to Mr. X, offered him an apology, we paid him compensation, we placed an ad in the local paper, we've offered further training and support to officers on the importance of robust note-taking. And last but not least, we've had to revisit our homeless placement policy to reflect the self-employed status of residents in Merton. So that's a whistle-stop tour, as I promised, of the report and the case of Mr. X. Thank you for listening. Happy to take questions, Chair. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that. Steve, the heart of this seems to be that we've reached the conclusion that this man is unemployed, and the Ombudsman have reached the conclusion that the same man was self-employed. Can you explain how that could happen?
In the finer detail of the application, our records showed that he said to us that he was unemployed, claiming universal credit. However, he said that he told the officer that actually what he was claiming universal credit to top up his income, not that he was unemployed. Now, the notes actually did not reflect one way or the other what was actually said or not said. And it was on that basis that we've decided to accept the LGO's findings and, importantly, gone back to officers and devised a new process that those kind of robust questions are answered. Now, that was the finding. These cases are difficult. They're very challenging. You know, we're trying to ensure that local people with local reasons to live in Merton stay in Merton. In an ideal world, we strive to make sure that everybody lives in Merton. But increasingly, that's a complicated process. Affects most of London nowadays.
And how common is it for us to send somebody to the West Midlands, or indeed even further in such circumstances?
It's a rare occurrence. You know, in the course of a year, you might get between 6 and 8 placements out of London. You have to remember, though, and it's worth pointing out, that some people would choose a placement outside of London as opposed to waiting on a housing list for accommodation in London, which A, is difficult to come by, and B, can be quite unaffordable in terms of rent charges. You know, the average house price in Merton is in excess of about 450,000. The local rents for a 3-bed probably in Mitcham varies, you know, anything up to £1,300 to £1,500 a month, which sadly might exceed the local housing allowance, but it's a rare occurrence. We try to keep people in. It's worth saying, and I'm going to say it, that Merton has the lowest number of homeless households in temporary accommodation of any other London borough. You know, that's roughly the background. It's a difficult decision, we realise, but on this particular case, he did appeal to Shelter, who took up his case. We upheld our decision, but it wasn't progressed to the county court.
Okay, are there any questions from other members?
Yes,
Hina.
Yes, Chair, can I
Sorry,
just...
John, I've asked Hina.
Right.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. And thank you, Steve, for that report. And I can understand how challenging not only the situation, but your job totally is. I mean, dealing with homelessness is a challenge that I don't think anyone would want to try and solve. And you're doing an incredible job. And I think the thing from where I'm coming from is not just Mr. X's situation and this example, but just how this is occurring throughout Merton and London itself. Like you said, this is not unique to you. This is happening all over London. And for that point there, this is why I want to really push for more of an investigation and what we can do better. And I'm really pleased that you have totally upheld the recommendations, which was to remind the staff to consider the policies and to remind the staff to make clear notes. But I don't think a reminder is strong enough. I completely understand you're taking the wording from the Ombudsman, but I think we should do more for Merton's residents and for London residents. And it's up, and I think Merton could lead the way here in making sure that this never happens again. When we look into the detail, that's when we can start finding out why it happened and to make sure it doesn't happen again. So I would recommend that the council doesn't just remind, but actually does training, actually really reinforces this, making sure that this doesn't happen again, so that it doesn't happen. So these steps will ensure that homeless people are found accommodation that's not as far as Birmingham, but perhaps 90 minutes away, where it should really be council policy. And if we can then review it fully, I'd love our group here to meet again, to talk about it again, see, you know, what the review says, because that would make our job what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be improving. We're supposed to be making sure that we do better for our residents. And I know that, Steve, your job is really, really challenging, but it's also up to us to make sure that these things don't happen again. And I'd like to know what your views are on that, because, you know, I hear that 6 to 8 people out of, like you said, only 6 to 8 people have been moved out. Is in terms of when? Is that in the last year or 2 years?
Per annum.
Per annum.
Per
over
year.
the last couple of years.
Steve, would you like to respond to the suggestion for how you could improve things there?
Yeah, I'll do my best. So when I said that we've sought to improve training on note taking, we're in the process of formulating. It sounds a bit grand. It's not meant to sound grand at all, but it's called a Housing Options Toolkit, which, if you like, it's a 52-page booklet, if you like, which is divided into 2 halves. The first half is dedicated to note taking, opening questions, probing questions, all the things that you would expect of a housing options interview. It is quite detailed. Clearly, homelessness can be challenging. Not everybody is as open and honest with their past housing history as we would want them to be, and that itself, when people are challenged, often leads to disappointment and aggrievement. So the first half of the meeting is dedicated to that. We're also having to look at how we interview people generally following COVID-19. On average, prior to the pandemic, we'd probably have 1,000 visitors a month to the housing service seeking advice. So we have developed a housing options toolkit, and the second part of that reflects changes in the law, the Coronavirus Act, changes to residential tenancies. You're right to mention it. I'd be welcome to come back at some point to share with you our housing options toolkit and to demonstrate what we've done. Sometimes what's helpful, if it would help you, and I'm happy to come back with these examples of cases, just 1 or 2, anonymized of course, which you might find helpful. And last but not least, it is a tough job, but for those of you that know me, you know, looking around, I've been doing it for nearly 47 years now. So it's not all bad. There's many positive bits to it. Like when you actually find somewhere nice to live, that's always a good result. Thank you,
Steve. And I really appreciate the fact that you're willing to meet us again, because I think that will really make a difference, because at the end of the day, that's what your job is all about, is helping these people. And
absolutely.
Yeah, we don't want these mistakes happening again. And it doesn't look good for Merton, doesn't look good for us. And we just need to make sure that we do a better job next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can I say that you must have started this job while you were still a schoolboy?
I was 16.
Right. Well, and also, is it 47 years, did you say?
47 years, Chair.
Is that all for Merton?
All for Merton.
Well, I actually think that deserves a thunderous round of applause.
Oh, cheers, Peter.
And you know, I hope you've got the long service medal, and that the chief executive has taken you out for a plush lunch somewhere before lockdown occurred.
Well, it'd be on that audit report.
Okay. Well, you'd have to declare it, of course, but
of course,
yeah. We've got the deputy monitoring officer in this meeting, so we do need to be very careful.
I'll be careful on that. Thank you.
Can I ask, when it comes to note taking, a thought flashed through my head, and that is, this is about somebody scribbling while somebody else is talking, and I frequently have to do that at work, and you know, it is quite an art, but you can miss stuff. Would there be some sort of human rights issues if we were to record those interviews, and that way, you know, then there couldn't be any ambiguity?
It's not something that, you know, up to now, Chair, that we've ever really explored, but I can certainly take that away. Often and not, the clients want to tape us on everything we say. They're less keen that we would tape what they say to us. Certainly, as you say, you do it in your own employment. We take verbatim notes. We do try to read them back, but the challenges arise when we say we don't quite understand the answer to the client has told us about their housing history. And then sometimes that leads to a little bit of an unsettling, challenging arena. It's those kind of issues. When it's a simple question of how long have you lived at X location, that's not so bad. But when we say, well, actually, we don't really believe that, that doesn't quite add up, that's where the challenges come. But I can certainly take that away as part of the recommendations from this evening.
If they're taping you, then wouldn't it be better for you to tape the proceedings and give them a copy of the same file, and then they've got it, you've got it, and there's no arguments?
Well, you know, you make a good point. For certain interviews, we do take people under caution, particularly around housing enforcement and offences under the Housing Act, and illegal eviction and harassment. But one-to-one consultations with individuals who are facing homelessness because they've been thrown out by their landlord or their mum could be difficult. But as I say, we could certainly follow that up. So thank you for that.
Are there any, I think, John, you wanted to ask a question.
I just wanted to make a comment, Chair, that to send him all the way over to the West Midlands from Merton, what a distance. I can understand why he appealed to the Ombudsman. Don't you think? Could you find anything near close?
We couldn't at the time, Councillor. And as I said right at the beginning, you're balancing an ever decreasing resource against those people that really, really need to live in Merton, against those whose perhaps their connection is less strong. It isn't great. I'm not saying we felt good about doing it, but it's balancing limited resources.
I've seen a number of hands. Agatha, I can only see the top of your head, Agatha. You need to
sit up.
There you go. I can now. Have you nodded off?
No, I'm reading the papers. No, thanks, Steve. For the work you're doing, and I would echo that, you know, the Midlands from here is a long way. I know you say it's only sort of half a dozen in the year, but I think for some it's still quite a long way away.
It's not disputed, Councillor. Yeah. You know, I visited the West Midlands myself to look at the stock that was available there. You know, in the West Midlands, you know, it conjures up all sorts of visions for some people. But looking in Birmingham or Wolverhampton, you could get probably a 3-bedroom house with a front and back garden, probably for a reasonable rent that you'd never achieve in London. So for some people, not all, certainly not this chap, the offer of a house is more attractive than waiting on a list for a flat that may never come along.
Yeah. Okay. What I actually wanted to find out, it was just a comment, what I actually wanted to find out, how are we doing with the homelessness at the moment? I know, you know, you've been working hard at it, but have we got any that's sort of rough sleepers? Have we got any of those that are around, or are they still housed in hotels, or we stopped in the hotel housing? What's happening?
Well, the council, obviously, when lockdown was announced end of March, adopted the everyone in principle. And by everyone in, that's everybody, regardless of immigration status, whether they have a priority need or vulnerable, and not just those who were rough sleeping, but those that were the threat of rough sleeping. And many of those were housed, because it was almost in a few days that the government told us to get everybody off the streets. So we didn't have a lot of time, to
Yeah.
be honest. So most of those people were housed into B&B and hostel type accommodation. We're now moved on to the next phase, which is finding them solutions, which is in supportive housing, private sector tenancies and the like. We're obviously committed to delivering the Mayor of London's target and MHCLG's target of eliminating rough sleeping. Dealing with rough sleepers is challenging. We've had one or two that not quite happy with the rules that having a tenancy bring about and have returned to the streets. But Merton's rough sleeper population probably is between 6 and 8 at the present time. It does go up and down, but overall we're doing quite well. And you know, the chair mentioned grants earlier on in his presentation, and Margaret mentioned an audit of grants. Obviously, we've had money from MHCLG on the Next Steps programme to
Steve,
carry on working.
sorry to interrupt you, but I think we're drifting a little bit away from the topic on the agenda. It's entirely Agatha's fault, because she asked you a question, you're giving her a straightforward answer. But I think I need to kind of
That's great.
Focus on the issue at hand. So are there any other questions? But Agatha, I think it's an important question you've raised. So I gave a degree of kind of latitude there, but I think there is.
You did, but not enough. Not enough, Chair. But you did. I can always speak to Steve later on and find out what's happening.
Okay. So are there any other questions on the report itself?
Suggestion.
No. Sorry. Can I ask Ben, because he hasn't spoken on this item?
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, I'd love to hear more about Steve's work, because I really appreciate your work, Stephen, and your team. A little comment about Birmingham, because I'm from the Midlands myself. The housing is much cheaper there. I know it painfully well living here. And I'd love to hear more about the future of the council's view on the future of the Everyone In programme. But as the chair said, we are trying to limit these issues. But what I'd say, just in your reaction to this and your approach to note taking, as you said, you're building this kind of 52-page guide, as you're saying. Do you regularly look at the local government ombudsman's rulings on other housing issues and see if you regularly check that? Do you regularly check your own processes and how you may kind of build kind of resilience to our risk in the future on that basis?
We have been recently, I would say, and it's not by means of an excuse, but in the years I've worked here, we've never had an LGO publicised homeless case. We've had the odd challenge here and there along the journey that I've worked in Merton, but we've never had an LGO case that was published. So I think that goes some way to the work that the officers have been doing over the years. That's saying we can't be complacent. We do follow that. We're taking a more valid interest, and I'm not going to hog the show, but housing is high up on everybody's agenda at the present time. There's heightened interest in housing. Hasn't been around for a long time, but certainly we're part of that heightened interest. So yes, we are watching what's going on, talking to colleagues in other boroughs and watching the LGO website.
And can I say, I wasn't aware that Ben was from the West Midlands, so I've certainly never detected the accent. And I think this demonstrates what an inclusive place Merton is to give you such a good welcome and elect you as a councillor for the borough. So,
I agree. Thank you, Chair.
Hinna, do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. This is an idea for Steve. I was wondering, Steve, that when you're very kind to agree to come back again, but I was wondering whether perhaps we could work with Shelter, because obviously Shelter wanted. I feel as if Shelter wanted to make a statement here, that they wanted to say something here, that there's an issue. Is there any way that perhaps you could work with Shelter and present something to us where you've shown some sort of discussion or some sort of assessment or some sort of recognition to what they're trying to do and the work that they're trying to and the message that they're trying to emphasize at all?
I'm not sure it's appropriate for this committee to be getting into that level of detail. I mean, I'm ashamed to say that I'm not sure which committee it should be.
Exactly, that's why. But I just think there is something there to think about, and if Steve can at least have a think about it, I'm kind of giving it to him.
We could, through Steve, arrange. I can talk to the chair of the appropriate scrutiny panel and see whether they could do some kind of detailed work on this, and then that might come. Some of us might be involved in that elsewhere, but I don't think it's for standards.
Yeah, I thank you, Chair, for allowing me to say that there. Thank you very much, and thanks, Steve.
And
Thank you.
Steve, have a word with me afterwards, and we'll talk about where we take this. So, were there any other questions or comments from members? Okay. Well, thank you for that report, and let me just go back to the beginning of it. We're asked to consider the contents of the report, which we've done, and to note the apology and the actions already taken to remedy this matter. But also, I think we've made a couple of suggestions which might improve matters further. And what I'm sensing from listening to Steve is a real commitment to do just that. The sense I've got from listening to him is that he is very keen to do the best he can within the available resources, and recognising that these are, as many members have acknowledged, really difficult issues. So thank you, and appreciate your sharing this with us, Steve. So that's that item dealt with. Item 7 is complaints against members. Fabiola, you're going to report on complaints against members.
There have been no formal complaints since the meeting of this committee, the last committee, so nothing to report.
Well, that's good news. It's actually quite common that we don't have such matters brought to our attention, but you know, we are here if that should arise. But I think there is a tendency for Merton councillors to be pretty well behaved. So well done. And item 8 is the work programme, which is on page 341. Can we have a quick look at that? Are there any comments or questions that people would like to make? We've certainly got plenty to do in November. No? Okay, well, can we note the work programme? And can I therefore move to declare the meeting closed at 28 minutes past 8. So thank you for your attendance, for your contribution. Thank you to the officers for answering our questions, and we will meet again shortly.
Well done, Chair.